Hello, fellow crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsStamp.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana video. In this episode, I'll show you how to combine images from different stamp sets to create a beautiful stamped pattern. I'll also show you how you can make the colors pop on your card by simply changing the color of your background. Here's a look at the products we will need for this video. Look for the rainbow stamp set or any other stamp set from Simon Says Stamp with large outline flowers and leaves. We will use images to build the background floral pattern. Another stamp set we will need is the beautiful butterflies one, or again, any other set with large outline butterflies. We will also need masking paper as we will be doing quite a bit of masking to create the background. Of course, you'll need a good pair of scissors you are comfortable using to cut the masks out. I like to use the spring cut scissors from Tonic Studios. You will also need an ink pad that works with your coloring medium of choice. I will be coloring today's background with Copic markers, and so I picked Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink pad as this ink is Copic marker friendly. Lastly, you'll need a coloring medium. I prefer Copic markers these days, so this is the medium I'll be using. I have already stamped a test pattern on a piece of scrap paper. This is how I like to start and practice. While this pattern looks very busy and it is rather hard to distinguish what is what by looking at this black and white piece, this will serve as a guide to stamp my main pattern. My background and card will involve heat embossing. I want to heat emboss the butterfly images over my pattern to add additional interest to this card. You can skip this step and just stamp your images in black ink. However, if you would like to heat emboss the images, you will need to use a MISTI stamping tool or a similar stamp positioner. Let me explain. It is not recommended to color with alcohol markers over heat embossed images, as the embossing powder might dissolve and it might damage the tip of your marker, and we certainly don't want that to happen. Because of the way my pattern is planned, the butterflies are most forward on the pattern. In terms of stamping a background and masking, you always stamp the most forward image first, the images that are closest to the viewer first. So we need to stamp the butterflies first and then do our coloring. Because we're stamping them first, we can't heat emboss them right away. We have to stamp them in black ink. Because I also want to heat emboss butterflies in my panel, I'm using a stamping tool to stamp the butterflies in black Copic marker friendly ink first. Then I will do my coloring, and then I will come back to the stamping tool and I will re-stamp the butterflies in the same spot, but in embossing ink, and I will heat emboss them. This takes a little bit longer to do, but it is the correct way to do it. To stamp the butterflies where I had originally stamped them on my test panel, as I like to keep to that placement as much as possible, I've placed the test panel over my main panel, positioned the butterflies aligning with the test stamping, closed the door of my MISTI stamping tool, remove the test panel, and stamp the butterflies on the main panel. And this is Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm using a MISTI corner to allow the wings of my butterflies to go outside the edge of the panel. Having stamped the images, I'm keeping them on the lid of my MISTI as is. I'm not removing them, as once my stamping and coloring are finished, I'll come back and heat emboss these images over the originally stamped black outlines. So just remember not to remove your stamps and keep them as is on the door of your MISTI. I already have masks for all of the images that I plan to use for today's card. I stamped images on masking paper and cut them out using scissors, so I've already masked the butterflies. Next, I'm going to use my test pattern as a guide to continue stamping flowers and leaves to build my background. I'm not using a stamping tool this time, I'm just stamping the images using clear blocks. I've stamped the large flower, masked it. Next, stamped the medium-sized flower, again, masked it. Stamped leaves, and again, masked the leaves. I keep stamping until I have the desired image placement and until my pattern is filled. Sometimes it is hard to tell if the image is already masked or not. It's very easy to mess it up, so it's easy to make a mistake. Just take your time and double check the image is masked before stamping the next one over it. Next comes the best part, removing masking paper and revealing the gorgeous stamped background. Here are two backgrounds side by side, the main one and the original one on scrap paper, and they look pretty similar. Now the next step is coloring, and this is something that will take you the longest. I like to break up my coloring into sections to make it go easier and maybe even faster. First, I'm coloring leaves, and for this I'm using the G21 marker as my lightest color, YG63 as my medium color, and G94 as my darkest color. As always, I go for a simple and quick coloring method using just 3 marker colors for quick and easy blends. Having colored all of the leaves, I moved to color the flowers. For this, I picked very warm, vibrant yellow markers, almost gold colors. Here, I'm starting with the darkest color first, YR14. Next, adding a transitional color, Y38. Coming in with my medium color, Y15. And then using the lightest color, Y08. I also later added another darker color, YR18, to intensify the shadows and petal folds even further. I'm not a pro when it comes to Copic markers or any coloring medium. I just do my thing, the way I like it and the way it works for me. And I never stress about making it perfect or doing it right. Here's what the flowers look like once all colored, very vibrant and bold. Next, I'm using brown markers for the flower centers, E79, E37, and E33. I will later come back and add white pen dots to the flower centers to add interest. The next part is probably my favorite. I like the look of dark, bold backgrounds, so I often color the backgrounds of my cards using markers. Here, I decided to use a very dark gray C9 marker to color the background almost black. As I start adding this color to sections of the background, you can see how that instantly changes the look of this piece. And boom, through the magic of video editing, here's the background all colored. I know not everyone fancies this look, but I find it very appealing. It helps the images pop and instantly draws the eye of the viewer to the flowers and butterflies. Next, I debated which color marker to use to color the butterflies. I was afraid to mess this background up by using the wrong color, so I went with a light color first and colored my butterflies very light purple using the BV000 marker. I thought that yellow and purple go well together, so using a purple color for the butterflies would complement the flowers nicely. While it did look okay, I later changed my mind and colored the butterflies blue. I think that worked better for this background. Having all of our coloring done, I brought the stamping tool back. Notice that the butterfly stamps were still on the lid of my MISTI as they were before when I did the original stamping. I made sure my panel was dry. I closed the door of my MISTI and looked at the edges of the stamps from the side to make sure that they fall into place nicely. This is something I often do to make sure my stamping would align. Next, I treated my panel with anti-static powder to keep the embossing nice and neat. I inked the images with clear embossing ink and stamped them on the panel, making sure to apply firm pressure to transfer the ink. I used Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold embossing powder, added it over the stamped butterflies, and heat set it using my heat tool. Now, my stamping wasn't perfect. It was a tiny bit offset, and so a bit of black stamping showed under the embossing powder. I think that actually worked to my advantage as it provided a tiny bit of shadow to the butterflies and made them look a little bit more interesting. At this point, while the background did look nice, I felt the butterflies were too light compared to the other vibrant coloring I had going on here. So I pulled out my darker blue markers and recolored the butterflies. I used B97 and B34 markers. I don't mind coloring over heat embossing, as I often do that, and I'm being very careful when I color over heat embossing. But it is best you do your coloring before you emboss the image, as I share at the beginning of this video. I added a simple sending happy thoughts sentiment to this card. This comes from Simon's All Things Happy sentiment strips. I also trimmed my panel down just slightly and adhered it to the A2 white side folding card base. What I didn't show on camera is adding butterfly shadows. If you look closely, you'll notice that each butterfly is outlined using a dark gray marker. I used a C5, and the main one was outlined using a C7 marker for a really dark, deep shadow. I'm not sure how I feel about the shadows. Perhaps I should have used some other colors to create these shadows, but I definitely think that the shadows were needed here to help separate the butterflies from the rest of the background. Here's a look at the finished card. I embellished it using sequins and jewels from my stash, and I quite like the way it turned out, but I'm curious if you like it as well. Let me know in the comments below. I hope you found this video useful and you will give this idea a try. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you guys are making. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next time.